Hi, I'm John Flynn, and many of you might know me as the civil engineer who switched to quilting. And the main reason that I started quilting was to relax. And for the past 10 years, I've been selling a quilt frame for hand quilting, which many of you saw me in my rocking chair relaxing and quilting. And in those 10 years of listening to what people really wanted to have in a quilt frame, I finally in this last year developed my multi-frame, which you see here as a 3-rail quilting system that you can machine quilt or hand quilt without basting. So it's relaxing to machine quilt as well as hand quilt. The multi-frame kit contains an instruction manual, 2 quilt frame ends complete with knobs and rod end fittings, the only tools you will need to assemble your quilt frame are a Phillips screwdriver and a tape measure. To determine the length of rods you will need, measure your quilt top and add 6 inches. Buy 3 2x2s, 6 inches longer than your quilt top is wide. Attach 2 rod ends to each 2x2 with the screws provided. To prepare your quilt frame to quilt, you will need 3 10-inch muslin starter strips, 4 ribbons or strips of cloth for side tension, a stapler or thumbtacks, a permanent marker, and safety pins. Roll the starter strip onto the rod and mark a straight line close to the edge, and then mark the center to correspond with the center of your top or back. Mark your rods A, B, and C to correspond with the raised letters on your quilt frame end. It's a good idea to have registration marks along the edge to check that the top and back are kept at the same tension. Starting at the center, pin the back of your quilt with the wrong side of the fabric up to rod A. Close the pins.
Starting at the center, pin the top right side up to rod B.
You can fasten your quilt to the starter strips with safety pins, or I prefer basting with a strong thread to avoid the bumps.
Close the pins and roll the top onto rod B. Starting at the center, pin the other end of the back to rod C. Close the pins and roll back onto rod C.
Notice the diagonal seam on the back so that the bulk of the seam does not roll up in one place on the rod. To get a nice tight roll of batting, it helps to roll it on a pipe or a broom handle.
Fasten rods A and C into one frame end, then add the batting and rod B, fastening rod B to that frame end, and then add the other frame end. Pin base the top and bat to the back, short of the starter strip on rod A. You don't need to close these pins. Adjust tension and tighten knobs at rod A, B, and C. Remove one frame end and slip into your sewing machine, then replace the end. Put in side tension strips and tighten. Bring your bobbin thread to the top and start quilting. When you've reached the end of the first section, remove the basting pins, the pins holding the side tension, loosen knobs A, B, and C, and roll the quilt ahead on rod A, feeding the bat as you go. Secure rod A, tighten the top of the quilt and secure rod B, tighten the back of the quilt and secure rod C, reinstall the side tension strips and begin quilting. Before you buy the PVC pipe to support your frame, it is important to measure the height of your sewing machine deck. This machine measures 3 5/8 inches, so a 3-inch PVC pipe measuring just over 3.5 inches is perfect. You may have to buy the next size larger pipe and set your machine on a thin piece of plywood if you can't get one that fits perfectly. If you don't have an extension table, you may need to buy 2 pipes. Sometimes the frame ends get off just 1 or 2 teeth and won't lay flat. To correct this, loosen all the knobs on one end of the frame and flatten it and retighten the knob. You will need to move the PVC back and forth to balance the frame. The frame moves smoothly with a palm-up grip and a slight upward pressure. Each time you change the bobbin, you will want to bring the bobbin thread to the top. If you have a top-loading bobbin, you will need to slide the frame down to the edge of the quilt and insert the bobbin in the space between the edge of the quilt and the frame end. Use a hand mirror and a flashlight to check the tension on the back. When it's time to move ahead, stop with the needle down about 6 inches from the edge of the quilt. I like to draw my quilting design on a paper roll with 4-inch lines to work out the design. Then I trace over the pattern multiple times with a ballpoint pen, memorizing the quilting pattern. I find this much easier than following a line drawn directly on the quilt.
A good way to get a feel for the frame is to practice it like you would your handwriting, with practicing O's and E's and L's. You can quilt a horizontal line by holding the frame against the back of the sewing machine. To quilt parallel lines, space with wooden blocks. You can guide the foot along a 1/4 inch thick ruler to make short straight lines. One way to transfer a design is with a perforated pattern. Rub over the pattern with a pounce filled with cornstarch. You can tie a quilt by setting your machine on zigzag and stitching a small design. Lift your presser foot, move to the next spot, and stitch again. Tie in your thread ends with a tapestry needle and an open-sided needle threader, or you can use a self-threading needle. I made myself a batting sampler to see how different battings react to machine quilting. The more you practice, the better. Even though the quilting area is around 4 inches, all the patterns interlock and there is no indication that the quilting was done in 4-inch strips. Keep practicing. You will end up with little quilts you can cut up and bind to make placemats, pot holders, or my variation of the rag quilt. This Wheel of Fortune quilt is basted with water-soluble thread and ready to quilt off the frame. Use your quilting design to enhance your piece patterns. I use the pebbles a lot to give my quilts texture. I machine basted this quilt and then removed the 3rd rail and hand quilted it on a 2-rail frame. Here I machine basted with washout thread and did the larger quilting pattern off the frame. Remember, you can hand quilt without basting on your multi-frame. You sit comfortably in your chair and the frame adjusts to you. When you're through quilting, the frame and stand store out of the way.